Katherine had always been one of those people who could walk down your street without you even noticing. Coming from a humble family, accustomed to hearing no far more often than yes, she grew up learning to stretch every penny and make life work like a short blanket on a cold winter night. Black with deep brown skin and a steady gaze, she carried on her shoulders not only the weight of bills, but also the weight of expectations and subtle prejudice. Her father, a construction worker, and her mother, a seamstress, taught her early that work is never something to be ashamed of. And Katherine believed that, with the determination of someone who had no other choice, when she got the job at the company, it wasn't in a position anyone would proudly put on a resume, at least not in the eyes of others. She was in charge of cleaning, making sure everything shone brighter than the empty promises she overheard in the hallways. She arrived before everyone else, sweeping the floors while it was still dark. And when she left, most people had already gone home. She was the shadow that kept the light burning so others could shine. The curious thing was that, while wiping down desks and organizing other people's papers, Katherine noticed everything. She knew who really worked and who only looked busy. She understood the dynamics of the meetings even without being in them. It was like watching a soap opera from the best seat in the house, only this soap opera was real. It's filled with intrigue, vanity, and the occasional kindness hidden under layers. But in the middle of that routine came the first jabs. Some employees found it funny to leave dirty cups on purpose just to watch her clean them. Others spoke a little too loudly about people who never studied while she mopped the floor. They were small aggressions disguised as jokes. It's like pouring salt into a wound and laughing at the sting. Management wasn't much different. A manager, with a rehearsed smile and a look of disdain, once remarked that working with a broom is for people without talent. Katherine swallowed hard, saying nothing. Not out of fear, but because she knew that sometimes silence holds more power than words, especially when you're building something on the inside. Among those who looked down on her, there was an inseparable trio. Claire, the star assistant who talked more than she worked. Robert, the analyst who never stopped bragging about his MBA. And Steve, the manager with a taste for cheap jokes. They were the ones who stirred up the toxic conversations and, subtly or not, made sure to remind her that, to them, she was just the cleaning lady. Still, Katherine refused to drown in it. She observed and learned. It was as if every day she collected pieces of an invisible puzzle that only she knew how to put together. The routines, the flaws, the waste, it all went into her mental notebook. As if she were studying her opponents for the day, she would change the game. And it's curious how. Even in the most underestimated positions, you can find hidden opportunities. Katherine, for example, knew who came in late, who truly worked, and who just put on a show. More than that, she saw how arrogance was slowly rotting the company from within, something a top-down view could never detect. Little did they know that the quiet woman, hands marked by hard work and pride in her own skin, already carried within her a plan she didn't fully understand herself. For now, she would remain invisible. But invisibility, when used wisely, can be the perfect camouflage for preparing a masterstroke. The day Katherine would never forget began like any other, early, quiet, and with the rhythmic sound of a broom gliding across the floor. But the routine was broken when Claire, with her sharp voice, decided to joke in front of everyone. She pretended to trip over Katherine's bucket and theatrically shouted, "Careful, or this water will wash away my shine." Laughter echoed through the hallway like invisible arrows. Every chuckle felt like a cruel reminder that, to them, she was just part of the scenery. Robert didn't miss his chance to join in. With a malicious smile, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, if only she were as good at studying as she is at mopping. Maybe she'd be here for another reason. It was a double blow to her self-esteem and her dignity. For a moment, Katherine felt the weight of shame pressing against her chest. But she stayed firm, looking at the floor as if guarding a secret. Steve, of course, had to close the show. "Forget it, guys. Everyone's born for something, right?" The laughter reignited, sharper this time. And there, in the middle of that cruel circus, Katherine felt something different bubbling inside her. It wasn't sadness or pure anger. It was a mix of determination and a silent vow. This would not stay that way forever. As she gathered her supplies, she noticed the eyes of a few who hadn't laughed. They said nothing, but there was a quiet respect, maybe even admiration for the way she hadn't reacted. Katherine knew that sometimes the best response isn't to explode, but to let silence work for you. It's like watering a seed that only sprouts in its own time. She spent the rest of the day on autopilot. Every mocking word was etched into her like an invisible tattoo. As painful as it was, that episode lit the first spark of an ambition she had never dared to nurture. If before she only observed, now she was starting to plan, and every step would be calculated. That night, alone in her simple room, she looked at her hands marked by years of work. She thought of all the stories she had heard of people who started with nothing and became a reference. They weren't superheroes. They were humans who simply chose not to give up. And at that moment, Katherine made that choice for herself. Next day began the same, but inside her, nothing was the same. What had once felt like routine was now training ground. Every conversation she overheard, every detail she noticed, became a piece of a puzzle she was patiently putting together. And though no one knew it, that plan was already in motion. The humiliation she endured would not be forgotten, but it would be used as fuel. Because Katherine understood that the greatest victories are born from moments when everyone thinks you've already lost. And in this silent game, she was just getting started. If you want to follow Katherine's entire journey, see how she turned every wound into strength, and discover how her turning point can inspire your own, subscribe to the channel now, and turn on notifications. Here you'll find real stories, lessons of resilience, and strategies to transform your life from the inside out. Amid so many voices trying to silence her, a few stood out for their respectful silence or small acts of kindness. There was Ethan, the new intern, who always greeted Katherine with a genuine smile and offered to help carry the heavier supplies. And there was Mrs. Harris, an elegant, elderly client who never failed to thank her for the spotless meeting room. These gestures, simple to some, were to Katherine like points of light in a dark hallway. One afternoon, while she was quietly cleaning, in executive's office, she was surprised by Thomas, one of the company's most reserved directors. He didn't say much, but when he noticed her organizing scattered documents in a logical way, he gave her a curious, almost admiring look. He didn't know it yet, but Katherine had already memorized patterns, routines, and details that most people never noticed. Over time, those glances and brief conversations began to turn into something more: trust. Ethan started sharing with her bits of information about what was happening behind the scenes. Mrs. Harris offered her contacts for free language courses. And Thomas let slip that he liked observant people. They're the ones who see things before others do. Katherine understood that. Sometimes allies appear in the most unexpected places. Encouraged by this new support network, she enrolled in an online business administration course. It wasn't easy to balance late-night studying with long work hours, but each lesson felt like opening a door she didn't know existed. She watched video lectures on her phone during breaks, jotted down ideas in a simple notebook, and dreamed of a different future. With each new word she learned in English, with each concept about spreadsheets and management, Katherine felt less like the cleaning lady and more like a professional in training. And even if she couldn't show it to the world yet, she kept to herself the feeling that she was building something solid, step by step. Ethan, noticing her dedication, suggested she also watch free talks on leadership and entrepreneurship. Have a business vision that many people here don't have, he said, with the sincerity of someone speaking from genuine observation, not flattery. Katherine smiled, but deep down she knew this was only the beginning. The days remained heavy, but now there was a different spark in each of them. When she arrived, Katherine greeted everyone as usual, but walked through the office with sharper eyes, like someone collecting pieces for a grand project. She knew that at some point, all that information and learning would connect. It was curious how, in such a hostile environment, hands still reached out to help her climb. These people didn't know it, but they were part of a silent transformation. Katherine no longer felt alone on her journey, and for someone who had always been, invisible, that made all the difference. Years had passed since the first day Katherine walked through the company's doors. Time hadn't lessened the weight of the work, but it had strengthened her resilience. She was still there, performing her duties with precision, arriving before everyone else and leaving last. The humiliations hadn't completely stopped now and then. Sharp remark or a muffled laugh would still cut through the air. But Katherine had learned to absorb these offenses like someone storing ammunition for a future battle. She knew every corner of the office, every routine, every face. She witnessed rapid promotions and sudden downfalls. She was a silent observer of small alliances, intrigues, and internal disputes that unfolded like chapters of a corporate soap opera. All the while, she continued to improve herself, studying late into the night and storing valuable information in her mind. It was in this seemingly monotonous setting that something began to shift. A different buzz filled the hallways. Rumors of accounting fraud, of numbers that didn't add up, and of secret meetings between partners. Doors closed quickly, and the tension was palpable even in the break room. Katherine sensed something big was happening, and that she was about to witness a decisive moment. During an emergency meeting, Katherine entered quietly to collect cups and clean the table. Steve, the manager, with a taste for cheap jokes, seized the moment. At least someone here knows how to clean up a mess. Too bad it's not the mess that matters. Suppressed laughter filled the room. Katherine kept her face impassive, but inside, she recorded yet another chapter in her strategic memory. Hours later, while tidying up the break room, she overheard Claire telling a coworker, "She walks around here like she understands something. But in the end, she's just the cleaning lady." Words sharp as blades. But Katherine had already learned not to bleed in front of those who wanted to see her fall. The real turning point came when, entering an empty meeting room, she found documents scattered across the table. They were spreadsheets, reports and notes that, to an untrained eye, might look confusing. But Katherine recognized patterns and figures that didn't add up. Instead of ignoring them, she organized the material and placed it neatly on the desk of Thomas, the director, who had already noticed her keen observation skills later. Thomas sought her out, impressed. "How did you know this was important?" Katherine didn't answer directly. She simply smiled, letting silence speak for her. Days later, the crisis officially broke. It was revealed that a high-level executive was behind the embezzlement, and that those documents Katherine had organized were crucial in preventing a multi-million-dollar loss. Suddenly, the invisible woman had become a key player. Some who once laughed at her now looked at her with a timid, almost uncomfortable respect for Katherine. That week proved something she already knew. Patience and silent preparation can turn any opportunity into a decisive move. And in this game, she still had many cards left to play. The fallout from the fraud case didn't disappear overnight. Even though Katherine had been a key player in preventing a multi-million-dollar loss, not everyone was ready to accept her as someone capable of more than cleaning. Some people simply couldn't stand to see the cleaning lady getting attention. One morning, she found her supply closet ransacked. Cleaning products spilled everywhere, and the words "wrong place" scrawled across the door in permanent marker. Katherine took a deep breath. There were no witnesses. No one would admit to it, and she knew that confronting the culprit directly might only make things worse. So, she cleaned up the mess, closed the door, and decided that scene would not be her focus. She had something far bigger to fight for, and, in a way, that attack was proof she was unsettling the right people. Not long after, an investor who had been a partner of Thomas visited the company. Upon hearing the story of how she had organized the documents that saved millions, he asked to meet her. Katherine, discreet as always, recounted the episode without bragging, making it clear that it hadn't been luck. It was skill and an attention to detail few possessed. The investor was intrigued. He arranged to meet her for coffee outside the company and wanted to hear more about her vision. Katherine spoke about how she observed waste in day-to-day operations, ideas to streamline processes, and even small changes that could boost productivity at no cost. He listened silently, and at the end said, You have the mindset of someone who builds businesses, not just someone who follows orders." Days later, he made her a proposal to invest in a small consultancy that Katherine could lead, focused on helping companies cut costs and improve internal processes. The idea seemed bold, but to her, it was the culmination of years of quiet observation and study. Starting out wasn't easy. Between meetings, spreadsheets, and initial clients, Katherine still worked at the company to ensure her financial stability. She spent nights and weekends running the new project, and every signed contract was a reminder she was on the right path. Growth was fast. Her knowledge of the factory floor allowed her to spot solutions that other consultants overlooked. Small changes produced impressive results for her clients, and her reputation began to spread. Gradually, Katherine realized she no longer needed the security of her old job. And, ironically, the company where she worked was beginning to feel the weight of poor management, slowly sinking into debt and losing clients. She told no one, but she knew life was setting the stage for something much bigger. That golden opportunity wasn't just a professional break, it was the door that could lead her to the ultimate reckoning. Katherine's consultancy was growing at a rapid pace, winning clients and building credibility. Meanwhile, the company where she had spent years working was crumbling. Contracts were being canceled. The team was falling apart, and debts were piling up like dust in a forgotten corner. Internal reports said former leaders were desperate, scrambling for solutions to avoid imminent bankruptcy. That was when Thomas, the director who had once noticed her talent, reached out. He knew that Katherine now ran a solid, profitable business. "The company needs help to get back on its feet," he said, his tone a mix of urgency and a hint of regret. Katherine listened in silence, remembering every stifled laugh, every look of disdain she had endured within those same walls. Before answering, she decided to visit the place. As she walked through the front doors, the environment felt different. Empty chairs, silent hallways, and a heavy atmosphere hanging in the air. Some of those who had once ignored her now looked at her with a mix of surprise and embarrassment. She walked with her head held high, the sound of her own footsteps echoing like a reminder that the roles had changed. Among those glances, she spotted Steve, the same one who used to make jokes at her expense. He quickly looked away as if he didn't want to face the past. Claire, who had once told her she was just the cleaning lady, now attempted to muster a friendly smile. Katherine said nothing, simply returning the gesture with a restrained nod. During the meeting with the new board, they presented her with numbers, problems, and pleas for help. What struck her most was the implicit acknowledgement. They needed her. It's not out of charity, but because they knew her experience, discipline, and vision were the only tools capable of saving that structure on the brink of collapse. Katherine listened calmly, jotting down notes as she thought. She wasn't there to seek blind revenge. She was there because she saw a strategic opportunity to expand her reach, strengthen her brand, and turn a story of humiliation into a landmark of triumph. When she left the building that day, she felt the wind on her face like a breath of confirmation. It was the beginning of a new phase, and she knew the next step would change the game for good. Months after the meeting with the board, the company's fate was already sealed. Mounting debts, dissatisfied clients, and an unsustainable internal climate led to the only possible solution: selling. That's when Katherine's name emerged as the unexpected buyer, shocking even those who had underestimated her years earlier. The woman who once pushed a cleaning cart down these hallways now had the capital, vision, and allies to take control. And not just take control, but transform. The deal was made far from curious eyes, with clauses and strategies carefully planned. Yet the announcement of the purchase did not go unnoticed. As soon as the news spread, the hallways buzzed with murmurs, and the longest-serving employees exchanged looks of disbelief. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath their feet. The once invisible figure from the past was now returning as the undeniable protagonist of the story. On the day of the official handover, Katherine arrived with the posture of someone who knew this moment would be etched in the company's memory. She wore a flawless dark business suit, but kept discreet elements that spoke of her humble beginnings, like a simple bracelet on her wrist, a gift from her mother. Her heels echoed against the cold floor, each step marking the rhythm of a new era. The stares were a mix of surprise, respect, and in some cases pure embarrassment. Steve, once the master of cruel jokes, couldn't meet her gaze. Claire, wearing a rehearsed smile, seemed to try erasing years of disdain with a single friendly gesture. Robert, the proud analyst, had the bitter expression of someone watching. The final collapse of his supposed superiority gathered in the main hall. The employees waited for her speech. Katherine took a few seconds before speaking, letting the silence build tension. With a steady gaze, she scanned the room, meeting each person's eyes as if she wanted them all to feel the weight of the moment. Then she broke the silence with a clear voice. As of today, this company is under new management. There were no bursts of applause or shouts of joy. The impact was silent, like a wave hitting slowly. Everyone in that room understood, in their own way, the real meaning of that phrase. This wasn't just about a change in leadership. It was about rewriting an entire narrative that once seemed impossible to change. Inside her, however, a quiet dilemma lingered. The temptation to settle scores was real, pulsing like a distant echo. She could have fired some people on the spot, imposed strict rules, and made it clear that the power was now hers. But Katherine knew that pure revenge was far too small, game for what she intended to build. Power, she understood, only had value when used strategically. It wasn't enough to wear the crown. One had to know when and how to wield it. Katherine was already envisioning structural changes, improvements to the work environment, and above all, a management system rooted in respect and results. It was time to show that leadership wasn't about shouting, but about setting the example. As she left the hall that day, she felt a mix of satisfaction and responsibility settle on her shoulders. The breeze coming through the main doors seemed to bring a silent warning. The past was gone, but its consequences would still be tested, and Katherine, more than ever, was ready to face them. Katherine's first day as the owner of the company was silent, yet intense. Everyone watched her, trying to guess her next moves. Those who had once mocked her felt an almost tangible discomfort, as if each glance from Katherine was a mirror, reflecting their own mistakes. She walked the halls with the calm of someone who knew true power never needed to rush. And inside her, the question weighed. Revenge or justice? In her new office, she sat in the chair once occupied by men who had laughed at her presence. She ran her fingers lightly across the desk, feeling the texture of the wood, as if absorbing the history stored there. It was impossible not to remember the humiliations, the whispers, the muffled laughs as she passed with a mop and bucket. But now, the setting had changed, and the choices she made would define the future. The first test came quickly. Steve, the same one who loved spreading cruel jokes, walked in to ask for another chance. His voice trembled, and his forced smile betrayed the fear of losing his job. Katherine watched him in silence, letting the tension build. And though her heart screamed to dismiss him on the spot, her mind whispered that the real victory was in controlling the game. Claire was. Next. She tried to justify her past behavior, saying she was under pressure and didn't mean it that way. Katherine listened to every word without interrupting, simply taking note. At the end, she thanked her for the honesty but made it clear that the company's culture was about to change, and that everyone would either adapt or leave. It was a warning disguised as kindness. Some cuts were inevitable. People who clung to toxic practices and refused to cooperate were let go without ceremony. This wasn't about revenge, but about clearing the ground so something new could grow. With every dismissal, Katherine felt she wasn't just reorganizing the company, she was rewriting her own story. For others, however, she offered opportunities for redemption. Employees who had been ignored and underestimated began receiving training, mentorship, and space to prove their worth. Katherine knew that balancing firmness with compassion was essential. Because a company doesn't rise through cuts alone, it grows through trust and respect. The atmosphere began to shift. The once heavy hallways now carried more open conversations, and meetings that were once tense started generating new ideas. Katherine was shaping something bigger than a business. She was building a culture, and deep down, she knew this was the best answer to everyone who had ever underestimated her. Still, Choosing the path of justice didn't erase the pain of the past. At times, walking through certain parts of the building triggered flashes of old humiliations, like memories unwilling to fade. But each time that happened, Katherine reminded herself that her very presence there was living proof that the impossible could be overcome. That night, alone in her new office, she looked out at the city lights. She felt a mix of relief and purpose. Revenge might bring fleeting satisfaction, but justice would create something lasting. And that was exactly what Katherine was determined to leave as her legacy. The following months proved that Katherine hadn't taken over the company just to change her job title, she had taken over to change lives. Soon, the once heavy atmosphere gave way to a vibrant environment where ideas were heard and valued. Her presence in the hallways, with her confident smile and steady gaze, inspired not only respect but also the sense that everyone there mattered. Katherine was now the living proof that it doesn't matter where you come from, but where you choose to go. One of her first measures was to create an internal development program, allowing any employee, regardless of position, to apply for training and promotions. People who once cleaned desks were now learning to manage contracts. Young workers who had never been heard before began presenting projects that transformed processes. Katherine knew talent only blooms when it meets opportunity. In the cafeteria, where she once sat alone to avoid hurtful comments, she now joined different groups. She asked about their families, personal dreams, and even hobbies. It was there, in casual conversations, that she discovered hidden talents. For Katherine, leadership wasn't about staying distant on a pedestal, but walking alongside those who built the company day by day. One of the most remarkable moments was when she promoted Michael, a young intern who had always treated her with respect, even when she was invisible to many. His rise was met with genuine applause, and Katherine made sure to remind everyone that recognition comes from merit, not social status or influential friendships. She also implemented a strict code of conduct against any form of discrimination or harassment. She made it clear that the company would not tolerate behavior that diminished or disrespected others. This wasn't just a change in the rules, but in the very heart of the organizational culture. Katherine believed respect was the foundation of any lasting business. The results appeared quickly. Productivity rose, employee turnover dropped dramatically, and former clients returned to sign contracts again. The company's market image shifted from unstable to exemplary in just a few months. Katherine hadn't just saved the business. She had reinvented it. At external events, she began receiving invitations to speak and share her story. She talked not only about her rise, but also about the difficult decisions she had to make, and how she chose to build rather than destroy. Her story inspired not only women and Black individuals, but anyone who had ever been underestimated. Katherine knew that being a leader was much more than achieving financial results. It was about leaving a legacy that could transform people's lives even after she was no longer in charge. That awareness guided every decision she made, no matter how small. Still, she was fully aware that the path of inspiration required constant vigilance. There would always be challenges, people resistant to change, and difficult decisions to make. But Katherine, now more than ever, was ready to face them, because she knew her story was far from over. Several years had passed since Katherine took over the company. What was once a discredited business had now become a market reference, not only for its financial results, but for the human and innovative culture she had cultivated. Curls, now a bit longer, still framed her determined face, and her smile carried the same unshakable confidence as always. Katherine was no longer just a successful businesswoman. She was a symbol of resilience. She expanded the company's reach, transforming it into a solid network operating in multiple sectors. Yet her greatest pride wasn't in the million-dollar figures, but in the social impact she was able to create. She launched scholarship programs for underprivileged youth, free training courses, and mentorships aimed at women and Black professionals. Her story was living proof that shared success multiplies in the company's main building. An entire wing was dedicated to talent development. Modern classrooms, digital libraries, and co-working spaces were always full of people learning, creating, and innovating. Katherine visited these spaces regularly, sitting with groups of students, listening to ideas, and sharing advice. She knew that inspiring was more than telling stories, it was giving others the tools to write their own. Katherine's talks were no longer limited to the corporate world. She was invited to social events, schools, universities, and international conferences. On every stage, her presence was both commanding and warm. When she spoke, she made even the last person in the audience feel as if the message was meant for them. Recognition also came from outside. Katherine received awards for leadership, innovation, and social impact. But even under the spotlight, she remained faithful to the simplicity that had always guided her. She used her visibility to highlight important causes and open doors for those who still had no voice. Within the company, inspiring stories multiplied. Employees who had started as assistants were now leading teams. Young people who had once worked just to survive had become entrepreneurs, fueled by the support and trust they received. Katherine knew her true legacy lay in these transformations. She understood that power was temporary, but positive influence could transcend generations. That's why she always reminded people that success is not measured only by what you achieve, but by what you build in others. Her office was filled with photos, letters, and mementos sent by people whose lives had changed because of her initiatives. Despite all her accomplishments, Katherine knew her work was not done. There was always someone else to support, more stories to change, more barriers to break. For her, legacy was not a final point. It was a continuous path, renewed with every step. One night, at a charity event, Katherine was invited to close the ceremony with a few words. She looked at the audience, smiled, and said, "They mocked me, but I never stopped believing in myself." The room filled with applause, but more importantly with hope.